Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
In the winter of 2018, a wildlife photographer named Daniel McCarthy took a solo trip deep into the Appalachian wilderness. He was no stranger to isolation. He had spent months alone in harsh environments across Alaska and the Rockies, but this time felt different. He had found an old hunting cabin listed on a barely functional website, boasting complete seclusion and authentic frontier charm. There were no reviews. That should have been the first red flag. The cabin sat on a craggy hilltop, surrounded by miles of untouched forest. It took Daniel nearly 5 hours of driving and another 2 hours hiking through a barely visible trail in the snow to reach it. By the time he arrived, the sun had dropped below the horizon, and the entire forest was submerged in an eerie blue gloom. The cabin was smaller than advertised. Just a single room with a stone fireplace, a rusted cot, and old tools scattered about like the last occupant had left in a hurry. Daniel lit a fire, ate from his tin of canned chili, and unpacked his camera gear. He planned to document the wolves rumored to roam the area, but something about the stillness outside gave him pause. The woods weren't quiet. They were dead. No wind, no animal sounds, no rustling, just a low, pervasive silence that seemed to hum in his ears. That night, around 2:30 a.m., he woke up to scratching. Not soft rodent-like noises, but long, deliberate scrapes against the wood paneling of the cabin. It started on one side, then slowly moved around the structure. Daniel sat up, grabbing his flashlight and his hunting knife. He tried to convince himself it was just a bear or maybe a curious raccoon, but bears didn't circle, and they didn't whisper. As the scratching faded, he heard a voice. It was soft, breathy, and indistinct, almost like someone talking through glass. He pressed his ear to the wall and could barely make out a phrase. "You're not supposed to be here." His blood ran cold. He shouted out, demanding whoever was there to leave, but the only response was the crackling of the fire behind him. The voice had stopped. But when he turned, something else caught his attention. There were handprints on the inside of the windows. Small, childlike, and smeared, like someone had been pressing their face and hands against the glass, watching him sleep. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, he hiked 2 miles uphill until he found enough signal to call the local ranger station. He explained what had happened, trying to sound rational, but the dispatcher went oddly quiet. Then she said something that made his heart drop. That cabin should be boarded up. It burned down in 1997. Daniel stammered, insisting he was there right now, that he had lit the fireplace, slept in the bed. But the woman insisted. The original owner, a trapper named Miles Thorpe, had died in the fire along with his wife and 2 children. Locals believed the fire had started intentionally. There were rumors of abuse, madness, and occult books found among the ruins. He raced back to the cabin, but something was wrong. The trail looked unfamiliar, like it had shifted overnight. When he finally reached the hilltop again, he stopped dead. There was no cabin, just a shallow, snow-dusted crater filled with blackened wood and charred stone. His backpack, his gear, even his footprints from the night before, gone. He wandered in circles for hours, convinced he had lost his mind. It wasn't until a search and rescue team found him days later that he managed to leave the forest. They said he was dehydrated, delirious, and had been found muttering the same phrase over and over again. "She watches from the windows." To this day, Daniel refuses to talk about what happened during those missing days. He quit photography, moved to the city, sleeps with all the lights on, and every winter when the snow comes and the woods fall silent, hikers claim they see a light flickering on that old hilltop. And sometimes, if the air is still, they say you can hear children's laughter from inside the fire.
Story number 2.
A couple named Mark and Alina had been together for 6 years when they decided to take a break from city life. Mark had recently lost his father, and Alina thought the isolation would help him grieve and reconnect. They rented a remote cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The photos online showed a cozy wooden structure with a stone fireplace, thick pine trees surrounding it, and a single winding road leading in. It looked like the perfect escape. They arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the trees. The place looked exactly as advertised: quiet, secluded, peaceful. A handwritten note was left on the kitchen counter by the owner, thanking them for booking and giving them one odd instruction. If you hear anything outside after dark, don't look out the windows. Elena laughed when she read it, thinking it was part of the rustic charm, maybe even a local joke. Mark, still numb from his father's death, didn't say much. That first night, the silence was suffocating. No cars, no distant hum of life, just the occasional creak of the wooden frame and the whisper of wind through the pines. Around midnight, as Elena drifted off beside him, Mark woke to a soft scratching at the back door. Not a knock, not an animal. It was deliberate. Fingernails against wood. He sat up, listening. It stopped. He told himself it was probably a raccoon and laid back down. But just as sleep returned, he heard it again, closer now. Scratching, slow and methodical, along the side of the cabin. Elena stirred but didn't wake. Mark sat frozen, remembering the note. Don't look out the windows. He stood anyway. The window in the living room faced the dark forest, but something made him pause before pulling back the curtain. A chill ran down his spine. The scratching stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. The next morning, Mark checked outside. No footprints, no claw marks, nothing disturbed. He didn't tell Elena. That afternoon, as they hiked a trail behind the cabin, Elena mentioned she felt watched. She laughed it off, saying it was probably just nerves from being so far out. But Mark noticed it too, an uncanny stillness in the trees. No birds, no rustling, just silence. As they headed back, Elena stopped and pointed to a tree. Something had been carved into the bark. It was a symbol, circles intersecting with slashes through them. Mark touched it and felt an unnatural warmth, like the wood had been branded recently. There were more of them, faint and scattered on trees leading toward the cabin. He didn't say anything to Elena. He just led her back quicker. That night, the scratching returned, but it came from multiple sides. Something, or some things, circled the cabin. Mark sat on the couch, gripping the fire poker. He could hear soft, deliberate footsteps just beyond the walls. Elena finally asked if he heard it too. He nodded, and they turned off all the lights. They sat in darkness, barely breathing. Then came the whispering. Not in English. Not in any language Mark could recognize. It came from the woods, just beyond the trees, like a dozen mouths speaking in unison through wet, gurgling throats. Elena clutched his arm. "Should we look?" she whispered. Mark remembered the note. "No, we don't look out." But Elena stood and took a step toward the window. He grabbed her wrist. "Don't." They stayed huddled together until dawn. In the morning, Mark stepped outside and found small handprints on every wall, hundreds of them. Child-sized but too long with too many fingers. The symbols had now been etched into the sides of the cabin. Elena wanted to leave. Mark agreed. They packed quickly and got in the car. The gravel road was narrow and winding, but halfway down the mountain, Elena screamed. Something was standing in the middle of the road. A child. Naked, pale skin, but wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its mouth hung open unnaturally wide as if broken. Its eyes were just deep pits. It didn't move. Mark swerved to avoid it and crashed the car into a ditch. When he came to, the child was gone. Elena was gone. He ran up and down the road, calling her name, screaming, searching the woods. Nothing. The police found him the next morning, incoherent and bloodied. He was taken in for questioning, then eventually committed when his story didn't add up. To this day, Elena is still missing. The cabin is still listed for rent. The owner still leaves the note. If you hear anything after dark, don't look out the windows.
Story number 3.
It started as the perfect weekend getaway for a group of 5 friends craving a break from city life. They rented an old cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. The owner had warned them it was isolated, with no cell service or internet. But that was part of the charm, until it wasn't. On their first night after a long hike, the cabin felt cozy, with a crackling fire and the soft hum of the forest just beyond the windows. But as darkness settled, strange things began to seep in. They heard faint scratching noises outside, like nails dragging across the wood siding. When one of them went to check, there was nothing there, just the oppressive silence of the woods. The next morning, they found the front door unlocked, even though everyone was sure they'd locked it before bed. They shrugged it off as a mistake, a nervous oversight, but the unease grew. One friend, Lisa, swore she saw a shadow move just beyond the tree line, too quick to be an animal. The group joked nervously, trying to brush off their growing paranoia. That night, things took a darker turn. While sitting around the fire, they heard distant voices, low, guttural whispers that didn't sound like anything human. Suddenly, the cabin's power flickered, plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, closer. One of them grabbed a flashlight and shone it out outside, but the beam caught only empty woods, swaying trees and a thick fog rolling in. Then the knocking started. Not on the door or windows, but inside the walls. Slow, deliberate thumps, as if something was moving behind the thin wooden panels. The friends huddled together, panic rising. The air turned cold, their breaths visible in the unnatural chill. Lisa, the most adventurous, decided to check the basement. The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she descended into the pitch-black cellar. She called out, but got no reply. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. The others tried to open it, but it was stuck, as if held by something from the inside. Frantic, they kicked and yelled until it finally gave way. Lisa stumbled out, pale and trembling, saying she'd seen something down there, a figure with hollow eyes watching her from the shadows. Desperate, they decided to leave immediately. As they packed up in the cold light of dawn, the forest seemed to close in tighter around the cabin, the trees bending as if alive. Just before they left, one friend noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden door frame, twisted shapes that hadn't been there before. Driving away, the radio suddenly crackled to life, the static giving way to a distorted voice whispering, "You shouldn't have come." The friends never spoke of the cabin again, but each of them swore the nightmare followed them home, lurking just beyond the edges of their dreams, waiting for the next time they dared to return.
Story number 4.
It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, just a quiet cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the city and its noise. The group of friends had heard stories about that place, but they shrugged them off as local folklore meant to scare off tourists. They arrived late in the afternoon, the sun dipping low behind twisted trees. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures online, old but sturdy, with a single flickering porch light and windows clouded with grime. Inside, the air was stale and smelled faintly of damp wood and something else they couldn't quite place. They set down their bags and started a fire in the rusty old fireplace, joking and laughing, trying to shake off the eerie silence outside. But as the night deepened, strange things began to creep into their awareness. It started with soft tapping sounds against the windows, almost like fingernails scraping on glass. But when they looked, nothing was there. The fireplace would sometimes flare up with an unnatural heat, burning too hot one second and barely flickering the next. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and bend in impossible ways. One of the friends, Mark, decided to explore the basement, a dark crawl space beneath the cabin that no one had dared to enter yet. He found an old, dusty trunk locked with rusted chains. Against their better judgment, they broke the chains open. Inside were strange, faded photographs, images of people with hollow eyes and twisted smiles, faces that looked like they belonged to people who had lost their minds. Among the photos lay a brittle, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. As they read, the journal revealed a horrifying truth. The cabin had been a site of ritualistic gatherings decades ago. The previous occupants had dabbled in something ancient and dark, something that could never fully leave a place once summoned. The last entry was a scrawled warning, half torn out but still legible. "They are beneath us. They watch from the cracks in the walls. Do not listen to the whispers, for they come to take your soul." By midnight, the temperature plummeted. The friends began hearing whispered voices, low and guttural, echoing from the corners of the room. The windows suddenly slammed shut with a force that shook the entire cabin. The fire died out, leaving them in pitch black. Panic set in as footsteps circled the cabin's perimeter, slow and deliberate, but no one was outside. Shadows pooled on the floor, taking shape and twisting into forms that crouched just beyond the light. One by one, they felt a cold touch, like icy fingers grazing their skin, though no one was near. Phones lost signal, and their flashlights flickered and died. The walls seemed to breathe, the wood creaking and groaning as if alive. Mark screamed and bolted toward the basement, only to vanish into the darkness, his voice cut off mid-cry. The remaining friends scrambled to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind them, something moved, a hulking silhouette with eyes glowing faintly red. The whispers grew into chanting, a voice rising over the others. "Join us." When dawn finally broke, the cabin was silent again. The door creaked open, revealing an empty room scattered with broken chains and the journal lying open on the floor. Outside, the forest was still, but the air held a cold, unnatural chill. The friends were gone. No trace, no footprints leading away. Only the journal remained, its final page now smeared with something dark and sticky, an unspoken warning that the cabin's horrors were far from over.